Johnny Mac is in the house. We're talking football. Eagles and Saints, NFL wildcard divisional weekend is here. And Johnny Mac, I got the Cowboy fans all over me today, man. I mean, they are out in full force. About 300 text messages in queue that I still need to get to.
It's funny how they come out of the woodwork. Get in a little playoff spot.
I said, welcome back to relevancy. It's fun to play in January, isn't it?
Get a little haughty. You stick the chest out. So you think you're going to beat the Los Angeles Rams.
Although I think they are going to beat the Rams.
Do you? Nah, they'll be done after this week.
You think so?
You won't have to worry about them.
You don't think? I actually think they're going to beat the Rams this weekend.
No, I'm starting to think I got a sneaking suspicion the Los Angeles Rams are going to the Super Bowl.
Oh.
That's my early prediction.
Okay. I had mentioned that, the origin of this conversation kind of started today when I said the Eagles-Saints game is kind of, now, it's not the primetime spot, the spot that the NFL put in its primetime game, but how many times do you see Super Bowl winning coaches and Super Bowl MVP quarterbacks face off against each other in the divisional round? I mean, it doesn't happen that much. And then you look at all the other matchups I was kind of going through. The Colts, Frank Reich making his debut, Mahomes making his debut. Dallas has won 2 playoff games in the Jason Garrett era, and the Rams haven't won a playoff game since 2004. Rivers is 5-5, and then you got Brady and Belichick with what they've done. The Eagles-Saints game is 2 teams that have had recent success and Super Bowls and MVPs, and that is interesting. So this matchup this weekend, I think they should be pumping that out there.
Yeah, and 2, not only that, 2 Super Bowl MVPs from the same high school. How rare is that? Add that into the mix, and the fact that Doug Peterson and Sean Payton are golf buddies. They're always making bets on the golf course. The one thing I will say from the Cowboys' perspective is there's a reason they're putting that primetime slot, and the NFL does that because they draw the best ratings, which means they have casual fans. So when you talk about all the casual fans in any sport, it's all the teams people love or hate, the New York Yankees, the Boston Celtics, Green Bay Packers are kind of on that level as well when they're good. And that's where the Cowboys are. They have a lot of casual fans. So the NFL tries to take advantage of that as far as TV ratings go. But as far as football people, yeah, I think the Eagles-Saints matchup is the most intriguing of the weekend.
Yeah, and I had mentioned, John, if the NFL began in 1997, we wouldn't have this Cowboys problem because they would have only won 2 playoff games.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't been good for a really long time. You got to go back to, obviously, Jimmy Johnson. And
they won that Super Bowl in 96, the 95 season, the 96, they won that Super Bowl, and really just have
and
not
that was really Barry Switzer, and that was really Jimmy Johnson's team. And obviously the Tom Landry, the great Cowboys, that's where they sort of became America's team. And there's always, as I said, there's always a franchise that is sort of what people glom onto, the front runners, as I like to call them. And that's where the Cowboys were. But even that has started to waver a little bit. And I think the popularity is, as I mentioned, is strictly with casual fans. So, the person that's going to come out of the woodwork for the playoffs, they're going to turn on the Cowboys because they're the most famous team.
And we'll get into their matchup here in just a little bit. The Eagles taking on the Saints. It's, a lot of people, and by the way, Armstead was not listed on the final injury report, so it looks like Teron Armstead will play for the Saints. And that really, was a big factor for them because their line has been an issue. But getting him to be able to play in this game, and that's, getting that extra week off, they should be pretty healthy and ready to go.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest concern because I think their entire offensive line practically was on the injury report at some point this week. But Doug Peterson knew they were all going to play. That's in the playoffs, unless there's some really, really significant issues.
Well, because the Eagles caught a break with Eddie Jackson last week. He was active but never ended up playing.
Yeah, well, I mean, guys are, as I said, they're going to go. If there's any possibility in the playoffs, that's what you save it for. And you expect, and Doug mentioned today, he expects everybody to be able to go, and that's just sort of the way things go in the playoffs in this league. And essentially, the Saints have gotten 3 weeks because they rested their starters in Week 17.
Yeah, what is your thoughts on that?
The week off.
The fact that they didn't play last week and rested their starters in the final week of the year.
Well, it's the old rest versus rust argument, and it's really a difficult tightrope, and that's one of the. It's a good problem to have, but it's a problem you do have when you're a really good team and when you're shaping up to be a number 1 seed and when you win 13 games. And the Eagles went through it last year. You got to weigh what's the best way to go about it. More often than not, most coaches are going to err on the side of the caution, and with their most valuable players, they're going to try to get them to the playoffs as healthy as possible. So, but it's worked in the past, and it's worked out horribly. So I don't think there's any sort of guarantee that if you rest guys versus not resting guys, it's going to be different. I think it's up to each individual team and how they handle it.
So no Sidney Jones, by the way, right? He is out for.
No, nobody's been ruled out other than Carson
Wentz.
He's the only player ruled out.
This? Oh, he is questionable. So, I'm sorry. It says out Carson Wentz, questionable. Sidney Jones, Michael Bennett, Shelton Gibson, Jason Peters, Mike Wallace. I saw out and didn't see questionable written there next to it.
Yeah, and I think there's at least a chance you're going to see Mike Wallace and Sidney Jones, and that the fact that Shelton Gibson kind of showed up on the injury report would open up a spot for Mike Wallace. And this is a week where you need as many cornerbacks as possible. So Sidney Jones could get back out there, but make no mistake, he's not going to be a starter or anything. This team is set moving forward with Devontae Maddox and Rasul Douglas. And Kervon LeBlanc at the nickel spot. But anytime you're playing Drew Brees and Michael Thomas, it's best to have as many cornerbacks as possible. So I do think there's an opportunity that he's going to be active on game day.
Yeah, and you look at Maddox and Douglas, how do those guys, what do you think, the Eagles – they don't do a lot of, there's not a lot of man going on there, but they're going to be in the vicinity of Michael Thomas and Ted Ginn. How do you find that matchup? You got Maddox 5'9", Douglas not the fastest guy. So if it's Thomas on Maddox and Ginn on Douglas, that sounds like a mismatch.
Well, it kind of, and that's one of the issues with the Eagles. I mean, the Eagles aren't going to travel cornerbacks, and they really haven't. And to be honest, they don't have a cornerback worthy of traveling, who's good enough to sort of go with the best receiver, which in this case would obviously be Michael Thomas. So they're going to play their traditional sides, and that's Avonte Maddox on the left and Rasul Douglas on the right. So that's one of the things that Sean Payton will have his option. He kind of knows that. And he'll be able to match up how he wants to match up. For the Eagles' perspective, to me, it's going to be interesting. They played a ton of dime against the Bears to try to stop Tariq Cohen because they kind of knew he was the most difficult matchup against the Bears. Very similar this week, and you have Alvin Kamara, who's arguably more explosive. The problem is, you got better alternatives. Michael Thomas, we just mentioned, and the fact the quarterback is much better. So I'm not sure you can just throw out 6 defensive backs and say we're going to go about it that way, because also if you do that, Mark Ingram is able to run the football. Kamara is able to run the football. So, I mean, that offense is difficult to match up with.
Yeah, well, Kamara, I remember talking about him extensively the last time these two teams played. And, he's just such a problem out of the backfield, catching the ball. He runs the ball. But I feel like Ingram, the last time, he had like 140 yards in the game against them. So what do you make of why he had such a big game last time?
Well, it's interesting because you remember that Peter King column. He got embedded with Sean Payton before that game, and they mentioned Sidney Jones specifically, and they thought they had a big advantage because they thought he was poor in run
Oh,
support.
that's right. That's right.
And he was going to run 3 of the first 8 plays right at Sidney Jones. The first play of the game was a run right at Sidney Jones, who wasn't able to make the tackle. Probably would have been a 3-4 yard gain. If he does his job, it turns into a 38-yard gain, and the Saints are off and running. And that's one of the reasons why Avante and Rasul Douglas are not in danger of losing their jobs to what is a more talented player, even if he's healthy. But that's what Sean Payton does. That's what all play callers do. And I wrote about this on 973ESPN.com. They're kind of like predators. And if they see a weakness, they're going to go at it again and again and again. And I think you look at what happened in the second half against Chicago and the double moves that Avante Maddox, I think Sean Payton will take notice of that. Perhaps that's the way he goes, but he's gonna identify what he thinks is the weakness, and he's gonna keep going at it.
So if Peter King is sitting in the room with Sean Payton this time, which guy is he saying is the weak guy?
Well, that is interesting, and that's, as I said, it could be Maddox. It could be Rasul Douglas because of the lack of speed. You mentioned Ted Ginn's back in the lineup. It could be running the football. If the Eagles do use a lot of that big nickel or dime personnel, where they're putting 6 defensive backs on the field, all of a sudden maybe Mark Ingram becomes the major player on that particular team. And that's where I think Sean Payton has a greater luxury than Matt Nagy did. He has a number of different ways he can go depending on how Jim Schwartz goes. So I think a lot of it is what does Jim Schwartz do, I think, is the bigger question. Who do you try to stop in this football game, first and foremost? Do you try to stop Michael Thomas? Do you try to stop Alvin Kamara? Last week, you kind of knew Tariq Cohen was the guy. And part of the reason Allen Robinson had big numbers is because the Eagles knew Tariq Cohen was the guy, and their game plan was to stop him.
Right.
And that enabled.
They didn't have a whole heck of a lot of. They didn't have a whole heck of a lot of others, and Robinson ended up having a big game. If they do that this week, Thomas is a very scary weapon.
I mean, that guy's on a different level. He caught 125 passes this year, and that's the thing. You can double Michael Thomas, but all of a sudden, then here comes Kamara, who's got 800-plus yards rushing, 700 yards plus receiving.
Right.
He can do it both ways. Ingram killed him the first game, as you mentioned, and now they're a little bit more equipped. One of the issues with the Saints throughout the season, why they tried to bring in Des Bryant, he got hurt. They brought in Brandon Marshall for a while. Is they haven't had that complimentary receiver. The fact that Ted Ginn is back is really, really helpful for them.
By the way, I like this text message. This guy said, can you imagine if the Buffalo Bills won all those Super Bowls, how many Bills fans there would be?
Yeah, I don't know if there would be.
There would be. He says, where would the Cowboys and Patriots fans be now if the Bills would have won all those Super Bowls?
Yeah, the Patriots are a better probably indication of that. The Cowboys' popularity, as I said, that spans back further to the 70s and the Tom Landry days. That's when the Cowboys sort of stuff started. But you're right. I mean, you kind of saw it with the Packers when they started having success with Brett Favre and then Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, the Patriots. It's interesting for those of us who have been around a while, not been around too long. The Patriots were non-existent before the Brady Belichick era. You had the Steve Grogans of the world. They had the one run where they got trounced by the Bears in the Super Bowl. But that was not a high-profile team. So
that was one of the first Super Bowls I ever saw, John. I mean, in '85, that was, one of the first. Josh asked me before because we were asking people the origin. I wasn't hating on being a Cowboys fan. I asked, what is the origin of how? And then I would give a thumbs up or thumbs down on whether that was an acceptable reason. And you have a lot of people that say the first game they ever watched was the Cowboys and yada, yada. I said, well, the first game I ever watched was Redskins-Dolphins 84 Super Bowl. But I'm not a fan of either one of those teams. So that origin gets thumbs down from me.
Yeah, well, I think I think it's individual taste. I don't have a problem. Here's where I have a problem. I have a problem with people that move from team to team. If you pick a team as a child for whatever reason, you might like a player, you might like the uniform, it might even be the success because people are drawn to success. If you stick with that team, I don't have a problem with you. But if you're one of those people, and I'll tell you the worst people, Mike, these people should be outlawed from society and set adrift. These people who say, I have an AFC team and I have an NFC team.
I was like that when I was a kid. When I was a kid, that was me. But I was like that when I was a kid, but I lost that when I was 15.
Yeah, that is a no-go.
I was a Phillies, and you know my AFC team was?
Let's see, the Chargers, because of the helmet.
I was no. In fact, I'll give you a hint. Speaking of helmet, this team is referred to as having a bad helmet.
The Bengals.
No, same state, Cleveland. I was at my AFC team was
a nondescript helmet.
Yeah, my AFC team was the Cleveland Browns. I loved Bernie Kosar. I loved Eric Metcalf. Metcalf was like my favorite player, but that didn't make me a Browns. Like they were my AFC team because I was a kid. But I finally the people who tell me they became this guy texted in. He said I became a fan of the Broncos because of John Elway. Well, Elway hasn't played in 30 years.
Well, yeah, but if that's what I was saying, if you're a young person and you say, I like the Broncos because I like John Elway, I understand that. And then if you stick with the Broncos, once you pick your team, you got to stick with them. There's no moving around.
This gentleman,
I don't have any respect for people that move around and it becomes sort of like a cellular structure and you move from team to team based on success.
This guy wants to know, if you don't live in an area where there is a football team, what is an acceptable way to decide? I think at that point you're open to anything.
Yeah, you're open to anything. As I said, it could be the uniform. It could be the player.
The uniform's weak, though. That one gets a thumbs down from me.
A lot of people, let's be honest, a lot of people are front runners, so it could be the success of when you're at that age where you're picking teams and you're watching the team in the Super Bowl. I don't have a problem with any of that. I don't have a problem with any of that.
All right.
But if you start team jumping, that's where I have a problem. That's where it stops for me. Once you pick a team, that's your team.
Jason Peters, Lane Johnson, the offensive line of Philadelphia, they have handled some great pass rushers. We talked a little bit about their role, but can the Eagles win the game because their line wins them the game?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you behind the scenes, that's why the Eagles are very confident going into this game, and that's the reason why. And that's the reason why they were confident going into Chicago. It's because their offensive line is back playing like their offensive line of last year when it was arguably the best in football. They think it is, and when they're playing at this level, the best in football, and they think they can beat anybody. And I don't necessarily disagree with them because I think that's the easiest way to success in this league. If you can pass block because of the rules, because of all the shifting, doesn't matter how good the opposing defense is. You just saw the best defense in the NFL. The Eagles weren't able to score a ton of points, but they did move the football through the air at times. And that's what having a good offensive line enables you to do. And against this team, which has the 29th ranked pass defense, they think they're going to be able to throw the football
against the Saints.
The Saints, yeah. And I agree with them. The difference is I think they have to win a shootout. To me, this is more like a Super Bowl with the Eagles Patriots. If you're going to win this game, you're going to win it 34-31. You're going to have to score a lot of points to win this game.
Yeah, we know they're getting Armstead back, but how's the interior of that line?
It's very good. Pro Bowl level center. This is one of the best offensive lines in football. That's one of the reasons the Saints are. I mean, before Teron Armstead got hurt, he was the best left tackle in this league. Ryan Ramczyk is in the conversation with Lane Johnson as the best right tackle in this league. Their offensive line is also very good. And that's one of the reasons they have a ton of confidence in the fact that, and when we talk about Michael Thomas and Kamara and Ingram and their ability to run the football, their ability to throw the football, Drew Brees rarely gets sacked. Now, part of that is because he gets rid of the football quickly as well, but they have a top 5 offensive line. So the issue with their perspective is health, and that a bunch of the guys are banged up, but it's a very, very talented group.
They call you Johnny Covers on the Mosher McMullen show throughout the course of the year. So let's get McMullen's picks for the weekend. Kansas City 0-6 in their last 6. They've only won 4 playoff games since 1970. I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, and obviously I think of all the teams in the divisional round and all the home teams, the one with the most pressure on them is Kansas City for that reason. Plus you add on top of it Andy Reid's history in the playoffs, and everybody's expecting the other shoe to drop and for this team to come up short again. It's tough to pick a 6 seed against a number 1 seed. I do think the Chiefs will win the game, but boy, they have a ton of pressure on them.
Colts going into that one with a lot of confidence. A lot of people like them right now. I like Indianapolis in that game, by the way. I think the Colts are going to go in there and beat Kansas City. Dallas, you said you like the Rams?
Yeah, I do. I think the Rams are starting to get back to where they were a little bit. My biggest concern remains Jared Goff. I don't think Sean McVay has gotten him far enough to where he can do enough by himself, but I think Dallas is the worst team left in the NFC side of things. I think the Rams are just too talented, and even though Gurley's banged up, he's going to play. I think that makes a big difference. I just don't think they can keep up with that team.
Sunday, it's Chargers, New England. You know, Rivers has been kind of the third guy in that conference. He could never get by Manning. He could never get by Brady. And now he's got, here we go, Brady in his 40s, Rivers at, 38. He's got another shot to try to knock off Brady. Is this the year for Rivers?
Yeah, I think they are going to win the game, and it's got more to do with Rivers and Brady, obviously, and the fact that I think the Chargers are just a more talented team. And I think we've talked about it for 2 decades. I mean, the Patriots have been amazing. At some point, it's got to end. It hasn't ended yet. They keep doing it, and it's pretty amazing the way they keep doing it. But you do see some erosion as far as talent goes. And I think it finally shows up this week because Chargers are loaded on both sides of the football. And they have so many playmakers offensively and defensively. They should win this football game.
Philadelphia, New Orleans, 4:40 right here, 97.3 ESPN. Countdown to kickoff starts at 1 o'clock. McMullen's pick is?
I pick in the Saints 31-27, but I do think it's going to be a very close game. It's going to be nothing like 48-7 back on November 18th. The Eagles come into this game, just got back from the NovaCare complex. You would be stunned at the confidence of this team. They believe they're going to go in there and win. They even had me wavering a little bit, but I think that's the toughest place to play. You could argue Foxborough, but because it's indoors, because of the noise, because of the way the Saints play in the Superdome, I think that gives them the slight advantage. But it's going to be a one-score game late. I got to lean towards a 9-point favorite, but it wouldn't stun me if the Eagles won the game.
Did Brandon Graham congratulate you on your head coaching job?
Yeah, Brandon thinks I look like Bruce Arians. So, yeah, I tweeted at him, and he was very happy that I got a new gig with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
He's John McMullen at JF McMullen. His score, Saints 31-27 over Philadelphia. You'll hear him on the Countdown to Kickoff show here on 97.3 ESPN. That starts at 1 o'clock on Sunday. All right, man. Enjoy the games this weekend.
All right, you too, Mike.